Hey guys, Tom Barclay here at Ferencvaros' stadium after Tottenham's 2-1 win in the Europa League, and it was a great night for Ange's Angels, if he's having that. I'm referring to the 4 teenagers he started with. My good friend George Sessions at PA put it to Ange afterwards that after the Busby Babes, the Fergie fledglings, perhaps are these the Ange's Angels, and Ange Postecoglou, in typical fashion, was not having any of that. He said we'd have to try better on that one. But I think it's kind of fitting, to be honest. 4 teenagers from the off in a European game. All right, Ferencvaros, you might not think they're great shakes, but they've won all their games at home, and the atmosphere, I can tell you, was pretty intimidating. So to start with 4 teenagers right from the beginning was pretty impressive, pretty bold, and it paid off, and I think pretty much all of them justified their selection. None more so than Mikey Moore, the 17-year-old. And I say 17, he only turned 17 in August. So we're talking about only just 17. It is unbelievable what he's doing. So let's start with his performance, because that is obviously top of the shop. So he started out wide right. Second half, midway through the second half, he went to wide left as well. Wide right was where he did most of his damage. Had a really nice link up with Pedro Porro down the right. Within about 30 seconds, he'd been cleaned out by a Ferencvaros player. But he got straight back up, carried on, showed that sort of durability and physical presence that James Maddison had referred to on Wednesday yesterday in the build-up to this game. And he just didn't look overawed at all. If anything, he looked like he was revelling being on this stage. You get the ball, his speed of thought, his sharpness, his touch was pretty immaculate straight on. We saw a lot of these lovely little dribbles inside, infield, which is where Tottenham's first goal came from. But he had a vision as well. There was a couple of times where he played a lovely ball across the 6-yard area. Unfortunately, there was no one getting on the end of it, but it was a good ball. And in the second half, he laid on a lovely pass for Timo Werner, who unfortunately, with Timo, the way things are going, I know some Spurs fans will never think he'll turn it around, just seemed to have no confidence running through and went around the keeper, but the angle was too acute and he fired into the side netting. But it was a good pass from Moore. And it was just all round just really, really impressive for such a young player. An impressive performance for a player of any level, but for this age, you can see just why so many in Tottenham's academy are so excited around the club, thinking him has been the most exciting prospect to come out of that academy since Harry Kane. And he backed it right up, and he really justified what was his first start, his full debut for Tottenham. And in the lead up to the goal, he sort of, as I said, ran in field for Sarr's first goal, ran in field, played a ball through to Will Lankshear, another player who was actually making his complete debut, not just a full debut, his good mate from the academy. And from that, there was a bit of confusion. I mean, Ferencvaros' defending on that position, on that goal, was pretty poor, to be honest. I don't know how they didn't clear it. And Pape Sarr found himself the very lucky man who had acres of space about 8 yards out and slotted to the far corner to give Tottenham the lead. And then obviously Brennan Johnson comes off the bench later and scores, and I'll come on to him before a late goal from Ferencvaros to give a bit of drama, but they won the game. But let's stick with the youngsters for now. So Moore, fantastic, brilliant, and we asked Ange about him afterwards, and he said he was outstanding, unsurprisingly. He said what he was particularly impressed with was his coolness under pressure, which was quite a pressurised stadium. The atmosphere here was, as I said before. His control in tight spaces, his durability. He actually played the whole 90 minutes plus. He didn't come off. There were a lot of players who did come off. He didn't. Ange felt like he could continue to contribute, which is why he left him out there. And he just said he was a special player. And I sort of put it to him that obviously this group of 4 are special, but is it a case of football does seem to be getting younger to a certain extent? And I talked about Lamine Yamal in the Euros, who's probably the sort of standout young player in world football at the moment. And he said, look, no, Yamal is essentially saying he's rare, like he's an exceptional talent, and to have a player like Moore at 17 be playing Premier League football, which only hasn't had a start yet, but doesn't feel like it's far away the way he played tonight, but has been coming off the bench and making impacts. It doesn't happen very often, and it shouldn't be that we suddenly expect this of all young players now, despite the suggestion in my question about that. And he was just very, very impressed. And I think I don't know. You got to, we'll come on to, I suppose, Postecoglou in a minute, but you've got to give him credit for having the balls to do this. To be honest, to play him in this game. But let's stick with the youngsters. So Will Lankshear is the next one. This is, as I said, a full debut. The centre forward that's came through Arsenal's academy. They released him somewhat foolishly. Went to Sheffield United, and Spurs picked him up about a year later on about $2.5 million. He was Premier League 2 Player of the Year last year. Scored goals like crazy. Started off pre-season behind Dane Scarlett and Alejo Valise, but quickly won over Ange with his energy. And I think, to be honest, it was a good chance he would have been loaned out, but because of Richarlison's injury problems, he's stuck around. And he himself has had a recent injury, but has come back from it. Bit of a surprise to see him thrown in right from the beginning, but I guess when Solanke's been playing so many games with Brighton on the weekend, he felt it was time to give him a go. I thought it was a hard game for Will Lankshear. I think he did his best. But he was, it's a big step up playing, men's football compared to 21s, and he was in a real battle with their defenders. He had a couple of really good chances. One very good chance early on from a Timo Werner, fantastic cross. I mean, he gets a lot of criticism, Werner, but this was a beautiful cross with his weaker left foot. And to be honest, Lankshear maybe should have stuck that one away. He kind of hit his shoulder as well as his head and went wide. Second half, though, he was so unlucky with this excellent volley which went into the ground from a Pedro Porro corner, which went just over the bar, and you really felt for him. And then there was also a moment just before he came off in his triple substitution where he was running through on goal and you thought he was just about to pull the trigger, and then a defender came in and slid in. So I thought pretty impressive under the circumstances, but not hitting the heights of Mikey Moore. But hey, how many players actually do that? So great experience for Will Lankshear. It's a bit different, I guess, with Gray and Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall, because they've been signed as first-team players. Remember, Mikey Moore and Will Lankshear, despite Lankshear being actually older than Gray and Bergvall, they still get changed in the academy part of the training ground because they're still viewed as under-21 players. It won't be like that for long, definitely with Mikey Moore. Whereas Bergvall and Gray, even though they're younger than Lankshear, were signed as first-team players. I mean, Gray's come in for about 40 million, 30 million plus 10 million for Rodon. Bergvall, I think, is sort of around the sort of 8.5 to 10 million kind of transfer fee. So it's a bit different for them. But I thought Gray was unbelievable tonight. So he started off at centre back, playing alongside Romero. His composure, his coolness, his fitness was really, really impressive. And in the second half, he and Ben Davies switched, and Gray went to left back. And there was one moment where I'm looking down in front of me, the sort of bottom left-hand corner, he had the ball and he was kind of being backed into a corner. He couldn't really lay it off to Vicario because the Ferencvaros sort of press was putting him under pressure, and you're wondering what was he going to do. But such a calm, composed player that he is, he suddenly just pulls out this beautiful little flick, almost like a sort of drag back and a flick around the corner, gave it to another player, which he didn't think was on, and it was just got Spurs out of trouble. And it sums up his confidence, the way he's playing, and it really does seem like an absolute fantastic signing that fits beautifully into this Postecoglou system, and has now played across the whole of the back line, and he's probably a central midfielder or a defensive midfielder, really. So that just shows you his versatility. So he was really excellent, and Ange was very praiseworthy of him after the game as well. As for Bergvall, I mean, probably wasn't the least eye-catching of the four, and particularly from how exciting he's been in recent games. It just didn't quite happen. He wasn't quite sharp. There was one point he fell over the ball, one point where Porro tried to play a ball through to him, and Bergvall kind of thought there was someone behind him, and he sort of left it, and Porro was kind of left, questioning why he'd done that. So it didn't quite have to click for him tonight, but he's obviously a real talent. And Ange afterwards was talking about these youngsters, obviously less relevant to the likes of. Well, I guess Lankshear was signed, and Moore was convinced to sign a new contract, so it's relevant to them as well, really. But he was saying, when he's signing these young players, and remember Bergvall was pretty much on his way to Barcelona when Tottenham convinced him to sign for them. The big USP that Spurs can have is basically promising as much as you can game time. So he's got to play them, and he knows that brings pressure to bring results because young players can be inconsistent. But he's had the wherewithal to back up those words and play them, and it's produced results. So fair play to them. And he talks how much he felt they really coped brilliantly and that they were going to grow from this. He often talks about growth. Sometimes it can feel like manager speak sometimes, but you just buy into it when Ange's talking about it. And you do feel, even though maybe it was at risk of a Tottenham bad result, by playing them here. The victory, which by the way is only their second away win in Europe in 10 games. The last one being that last gasp win against Marseille, where Pierre-Emile Højbjerg banged in that goal in the 95th minute in the Champions League under Conte. It doesn't happen too often, and like I say, it's an intimidating atmosphere. They will be so much better for this, and it will really help. And now with 6 points on the board, when they play Roma at home, which is obviously another level of opposition, why not give one of them a go? Why not play more from the start? You've got more of a wiggle room to do it, given you've got the points on the board, and Moore could maybe only grow from there. He looks like he's ready to play in these games, so why not? So yeah, that's pretty much the main sort of talking points about the young players. As for other things I noticed, I mean, Porro started right back with Romero, and Gary Neville always talks about like the combinations and partnerships in a football team being really, really important. His obviously with David Beckham being the prime example. And what I quite like about Spurs' first team, which most of it wasn't here, is there are a few of them are popping up. So Porro and Romero was on show here today. Like, they get on really well. They often are sort of high-fiving each other or chest bumping whenever they do a good defensive block, or one of them does, but also the way they link up. I think it's a nice little partnership they've got there. Maddison and Kulusevski are starting to blossom a lovely little partnership in the middle, as is Solanke and Brennan Johnson. So it's a sign of a sort of well-organised team that you're starting to see these little combinations pop up all across the pitch. And when you bring in these other young players to come into it, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic that this team has got the fluency and the cohesion, I suppose, with all the players sort of working well together to get results and keep producing performances. And it's not a surprise, they've now won 5 in a row. Let's talk about Brennan Johnson briefly. We feel like talking about him all the time at the moment, but now 5 goals in 5, and he came off the bench. He had one first shot which he cracked onto the bar. It was so close, very unlucky. But the way, watching it back, we were here, you probably saw it better from where you were watching on your TV, because we had no replays in the stadium, so kind of had to go off what we could see, right in front of us. So it wasn't until later on off social media that I saw a clip back of Johnson's goal, where I just realised what a fantastic finish it was. I believe with his left foot. I mean, really, really impressive. He's just clearly actually sky high, full of confidence now. Ange was asked about him afterwards. He sort of questioned. He said he didn't really get why people were getting on his backs. He's such a young player. He's got brilliant potential. He talked a lot in recent weeks about how much he is impressed with his work ethic and wanting to improve as a player. But he said now he's changing games, and he is. That's the 5th game in a row, and it's not just scoring goals; it's scoring big goals. Coventry to win the game, Brentford the goal to go ahead for 2-1. Man United, the first goal, albeit it was more about Mickey van der Ven, but he had to be there to score that goal. Karabag, obviously after they've gone down to 10 men, I think he got the opener there as well. And here proved to be the match winner. So he's scoring big goals, making big contributions. It's all going very well for Brennan Johnson. Dominic Solanke, just briefly mention on him. He's obviously got called up for the England squad today. He was, as I say, left out of this team. He came off the bench for the final 9 minutes. There's not really much to be said about his own performance because he didn't have long enough. But just a word on Solanke. I mean, I think we kind of thought it might happen. He's someone that Kazi's well aware of. I think he would have worked with him, I believe, as an assistant to Boothroyd, Adi Boothroyd under 21s. But it's just well deserving. He had obviously that injury early doors, but he's come back and he's just looked like he's slotted in just as we hoped he would since signing for Tottenham, because of the profile that he has, that he fits this team. And look, now he can go into that game against Brighton at the weekend, as can many of the regular starters, with a nice relative rest under his belt, feeling high on confidence, having been in the England squad, and ready to give Harry Kane and Ollie Watkins a sort of push in England training. We'll see if he gets his second cap. I mean, obviously he had his first cap. It was 7 years ago now, which underlines the journey that Solanke has been on since bursting on the scene, having to getting relegated, having to rebuild his confidence in the Championship with Bournemouth, and then now being here. But fair play to him. Obviously, James Maddison missed out. I think we kind of got the sense that was likely to happen. He spoke yesterday about how much he wanted to be in the squad, so obviously a blow from his point of view. I guess presumably that's mainly down to just the embarrassment of riches that Carsley has at his disposal in midfield, particularly in the attacking number 10 position. I mean, as good as Maddison is, I don't think many people could argue that Bellingham, Palmer, Foden shouldn't be ahead of him really if they're going to play in that position. And obviously only one can play there, so Carsley's got his own selection headache to deal with. But yeah, he's unlucky because he's played really, really well in the last couple of games. Hopefully it keeps him fired up. He talked yesterday at length about how much he is motivated by proving the doubters wrong. And so I suppose you could view this sort of England snub, so to speak, as another thing to prove wrong, another way to win over the interim England manager Lee Carsley for the next group of fixtures. So hopefully that should be to Tottenham's benefit. Just one word on the atmosphere. I've mentioned it a few times. So first of all, it's quite interesting seeing both teams play effectively in green. So Ferencvaros play in white and green stripes. And Spurs apparently asked UEFA to play in their second kit, which is blue. But because they're kind of striped as well, when you look at them, UEFA presumably said no. So because Ferencvaros are basically a white kit with some green stripes, they couldn't play in the home kit, Spurs, the white kit, so it was green. But actually, you could see why it worked fine. But there was one moment where I could barely see anything in the second half because flares were let off at half time, which apparently is a common occurrence here at the Groupama Arena, and the smoke just went right across the pitch, and they actually had to be stopped at one moment so they could clear out. And there were some, pretty raucous chanting and bouncing up and down from the home supporters, as is often the case when you come to these parts of Europe. And so, again, fair play to Tottenham being able to handle that kind of atmosphere. Some players might have crumbled under that, but you never really got the sense of that, and particularly with Moore, just no fear at all. And fair play to him. And yeah, just finally on the selection, you could argue it was a bit of a gamble, but it's paid off. And as I alluded to earlier, now it gives Ange the luxury of having a pretty fresh first team for Brighton, which is, as we know from last season when they got thumped 4-2, 4-0 down. It was a really tough game. He can now bring back in the likes of Van der Ven, Udogie if he's fit, Son if he's fit. Johnson only had a few minutes, obviously. Solanke only had a few minutes. Maddison only didn't have that long either. Bentancur was completely fresh, and Kulusevski as well. So that should stand him in good stead for that. And like I was saying before, to wrap it up, I mean, it's the fact that now, and this is kind of what he's been talking about, to be fair. He's talked about the fact, and it did feel like a gamble at Coventry because they weren't playing well. They didn't play well in that game and they kind of got away with it. But his point was that I need to play these guys now so that when I'm forced to play them later through injuries or suspension, they're going to be ready. And now, with the experience they've gained from this, particularly, as I keep saying, Mikey Moore and Archie Gray throughout this season, they're going to be in a position where they're going to take on Roma at home if they get selected and be ready and be totally up for the fight and ready to excel, hopefully. So that can only help Spurs, and suddenly their squad looks really deep if you can start relying on these young players. So all in all, a good night for Spurs in Budapest.